Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight we are sitting with one of the quietest and most counterintuitive teachings in the Tao Te Ching, known in the West as the Tao Te Ching. It is the teaching about what happens when you stop fighting. Not the stopping that is surrender, not the stopping that is defeat, the stopping that comes from a very deep recognition that the current was never the problem. The problem, the source of the particular exhaustion that follows you even into the places where you are supposed to be resting, was the energy spent refusing the current. The fight against it, the continuous, invisible, enormously expensive effort of insisting that things be different from what they actually are. Lao Tzu called this quality Wu Wei, the principle of effortless action, of not forcing, of moving with the nature of things rather than against it. He was not suggesting that you do nothing. He was suggesting something far more specific, that the kind of doing which arises from genuine attunement to what is actually here produces more than the kind of doing which arises from resistance to what is here. The person swimming with the river covers more ground and arrives more rested than the person swimming against it. The effort is the same. The direction of the effort is everything. Tonight we will follow this teaching through 13 chapters, through 13 traditions, each of which has noticed from its own angle the same thing, that the greatest source of unnecessary suffering in a human life is not the circumstances themselves, but the endless, exhausting project of insisting that the circumstances be otherwise. You do not need to know anything about Taoist philosophy to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever arrived at the end of a day feeling more tired than the day's actual events could account for, who has sensed somewhere just below the surface of the exhaustion that something in the refusal, in the bracing, in the holding against, was costing more than the thing being refused. And who has wondered if there was a way to let the current carry some of what you have been carrying alone? Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. The current is not something that needs to be solved tonight. It only needs to be noticed, and perhaps, in the noticing, to be joined. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. Lao Tzu wrote that water does not fight its way to the sea. It finds the low places. It goes around what cannot be moved. It seeps through what appears solid. And in doing so, without force, without plan, without resistance to any obstacle it meets, it arrives, not despite its softness, but because of it. The hardness of the stone does not survive the patience of the water. This is the first and most essential form of Wu Wei, the recognition that the nature of things already contains a direction, and that working with this direction costs less and achieves more than working against it. The river does not decide to flow downhill. It does not resist the pull. It simply follows the quality that is already native to it, the quality of water, which is to find the low place and rest there. Most of us have learned a different habit. We have learned to resist, to hold against the current, to insist, through the expenditure of enormous sustained effort, that things move in the direction we prefer rather than the direction they are already moving. And this effort is sometimes necessary. Sometimes the thing that needs to happen requires exactly this pushing. But we have become so practiced at the pushing that we push even when the current is already going where we need to go. We fight the river on its way to the sea. Tonight's invitation is simple, and not simple at all, to notice where the river is already going, and to turn. There was once a young dervish who was trying to force himself into ecstasy. He had been studying and practicing the whirling for several years. The turning, the sema, the sacred whirling that was the central practice of his order, was something he had devoted himself to with genuine sincerity. He understood its purpose. He understood, at least intellectually, that the turning was not the goal but the vehicle, that the state the turning was meant to induce was a quality of openness, of surrender, of the self becoming transparent to what was larger than itself. But when he turned with effort. He turned with the quality of someone reaching for something just out of reach, straining toward a state that was not yet present. He could feel the ecstasy nearby, somehow, like a current of warmth that he could almost enter, and the nearness of it made him reach harder, lean further, press more urgently toward the threshold. The harder he pressed, the further the threshold seemed to move. His teacher had watched this for several weeks before he said anything. One afternoon after the practice, the teacher sat with him. "You are very effortful," the teacher said. "I am trying," the dervish said. "Yes," the teacher said, "I can see the trying from across the room. It is the most visible thing about you when you turn." He paused. "Tell me, when the turn comes through you, what do you notice?" "I don't." The dervish stopped. "I'm not sure it does. I am the one doing the turning." "Are you?" the teacher said. He looked at the dervish with something that was steady and patient. "Put your hand out. Let me show you something." The dervish held out his hand. The teacher placed a small, smooth stone in his palm. "Hold it," the teacher said. The dervish held it. "What is the holding?" the teacher asked. "I am keeping it from falling," the dervish said. "Yes," the teacher said. "And if you relax the hold?" The dervish relaxed. The stone settled deeper into his palm. It did not fall. His palm was still there, still present. "And now?" the teacher asked. "It's still here," the dervish said, "just resting in my hand, not falling." "The hand is still doing something," the teacher said, "but it is no longer straining. The stone is held, but by the shape of the hand rather than by the force of the grip." He looked at the dervish. "The turning is the same. The turn comes through you, not from you. Your effort, your genuine, sincere effort, creates the conditions. But the state itself is not produced by the effort. It arrives in the space the effort makes, when the effort becomes the hand at rest rather than the hand gripping." The young dervish sat with this for a long time. "So I should try less?" he asked. "Not try less," the teacher said. "Try differently. The effort of reaching and the effort of receiving are different kinds of effort. The reaching says, 'I will go and get it.' The receiving says, 'I will be here when it arrives.'" He looked at the dervish. "You have been going to get it. It cannot be gotten. It can only arrive. and it arrives when the arriving is easier than the not arriving, which is to say, when you stop filling the space it would arrive into with your reaching. The dervish returned to the turning with this. The adjustment was subtle, almost invisible from the outside. He turned with the same commitment, the same physical precision, the same sincere desire for the state. But in the quality of the intending, something had shifted. He was no longer reaching, he was present, facing the direction from which the arrival would come. And after some weeks of this practice, something arrived that he had not been able to produce in all his years of reaching. Not a dramatic ecstasy, but a quality of transparent aliveness, as though the thing he had been reaching for had finally been able to enter because the space of his reaching was now empty. He returned to the teacher. "It came," he said simply. "It was always coming," the teacher said. "You were in the way." In Sufi tradition, the concept the young dervish was grappling with has a specific name: tawakkul, trust, surrender, the quality of releasing the outcome into something larger than the striving self. The tawakkul of the Sufi tradition is not passivity. It is not the abdication of effort or intention. It is the specific quality of carrying the effort lightly, of doing what is genuinely in your hands to do, and then releasing the result of the doing into the care of the divine. The great Sufi poet Rumi returned to this theme throughout his work. The reed flute cries not because it is trying to cry, but because the breath moves through the hollow and the crying is the natural result. Stop the breath and there is no sound. Force the cry and there is noise, but not music. The music, the semar's ecstasy, the poetry's power, is what happens when the human instrument is present and available and not in the way of what wants to move through it. There is also in Sufi teaching the concept of fana, the annihilation of the ego self in the divine, the dissolving of the striving I into something larger. This is not death. It is the specific experience of stepping out of the river of self and discovering that the river of the divine was already there, had always been there, and was moving in a direction that the ego self's effortful swimming had been obscuring. Fana is not forced, it arrives, and it arrives when the forcing has stopped. The young dervish's discovery that the ecstasy was always coming and that the reaching was in the way, is this Sufi teaching in its most immediate embodied form. Think about where in your life you have been reaching so hard for a state that the reaching itself has been the obstacle. The sleep you have been trying to force, which recedes in direct proportion to the force applied. The calm you have been pursuing in the very way that makes calm impossible. The connection you have been straining toward in conversations where the strain makes genuine connection awkward and effortful for everyone in the room. In all of these, the state was available. The reaching was expensive, and the cost was not just the wasted energy, it was the specific quality of not quite arriving that characterized the reaching, the sense of the thing always slightly out of reach, which generated more reaching, which increased the not arriving in a loop that could continue indefinitely. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of trying to remember something. a name, a word, a piece of music, and how the trying blocks the remembering. And then in the specific experience of releasing the try, turning to something else, and finding the name already there in the next breath, having arrived in the moment, the reaching stopped. You may have felt this yourself in the particular quality of an evening when you stopped trying to relax and simply lay down. No technique, no intention, just the body meeting the surface it was resting on, and how the relaxation that arrived in that moment was more complete than anything the trying had produced. Right now, in this breath, you do not need to reach for sleep. Sleep is the current. It is already moving in the direction of where you are. The turn toward it is not an effort. It is a releasing of the effort that has been going in the other direction. Let the hand open. Let the stone rest. What you have been reaching for has been reaching for you. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu observed that the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world. He was not speaking of combat or strategy. He was pointing at the quality of something that does not insist on its own shape, that takes the shape of whatever it finds, and by taking that shape enters places that the rigid cannot enter, and accomplishes what the rigid cannot accomplish. This teaching about softness and its power appears in a very specific context in the Tao Te Ching, the context of relationship. Not the relationship between people only, but the relationship between any intentional being and the nature it encounters. The horse trainer who forces the horse into compliance has won a specific kind of victory that costs everything it gains. The trainer who finds the horse's own quality and works with it has won a different kind of victory that costs very little and lasts very long. The Lakota tradition holds a specific understanding of this distinction between the person who breaks something into a new shape and the person who finds what the thing already wants to become and helps it move in that direction. The second person has not done less. They have done something fundamentally different, which begins not with intention, but with listening. What you resist, you empower. What you join, you can guide. The current does not become more manageable by being fought. It becomes more manageable by being joined at the point where it is going, where you need to go. There was once a young man who could not break the horse. He had been given this task by his father, an elder of the community, who had, in his own younger years, been known for the quality of his work with horses. The horse was a young mare, strong and quick, and considerably more stubborn than any horse the young man had encountered before. He had applied everything he knew. He had tried patience, and he had tried firmness, and he had tried the specific techniques his father had described. None of it was working. The mare had not broken. She had only grown more resistant with each attempt. His father came to watch one afternoon. The young man was exhausted and frustrated and covered in the evidence of a long struggle. The mare stood at a distance, breathing hard, entirely not broken. The father sat down and watched for a while. "You are working very hard," he said. "She won't yield," the young man said. "No," his father agreed. "She won't." He looked at the mare for a long moment. "What is she doing right now?" The young man looked. The mare was standing still, watching. "Standing still," he said. "And before that, moving away. And the direction she moves when she moves away?" The young man thought. "Left," he said. "She always moves to the left." "Yes," his father said. "She has a direction, a preference. She is not moving randomly. She is moving in the way that is comfortable for her body." He was quiet for a moment. "And you have been trying to move her in every direction except the one she prefers." The young man looked at his father. "I'm supposed to move her the way she wants to go," he said. "She'll think she's won." "The question of who has won is interesting," his father said, "but it is not the first question." He stood and walked slowly to the edge of the space where the mare was standing. He moved with the particular quality the young man had noticed in his father all his life, not the quality of someone approaching something they intend to control, but the quality of someone going to meet something they are genuinely curious about. The mare watched him come. She did not move. The father stopped at the edge of her comfort. He stood there. He waited. After a while, the mare took a step toward him. He took a step back. She took another step. He turned, very slightly to the left. The mare followed. The young man watched this for a long time. What his father was doing was barely visible. Micro-adjustments of position, direction, weight. He was not, from the outside, doing very much at all. But the mare was moving with him. After some time, his father walked back to where the young man was standing. The mare stood quietly a short distance behind him, as though she had always intended to be there. "She was not resisting you," his father said. "She was being what she is, and what she is has a direction. You were trying to put your direction in the place of hers." He looked at his son. "The work is not to replace her direction with yours. The work is to find the place where her direction and yours go the same way, and then move there." "And if they never go the same way?" the young man asked. "That is when you have to decide what you actually need from her," his father said, "which is a different question. But before you get to that question, you have to answer the first one. Do you know where she actually wants to go?" He looked at his son steadily. "You spent the whole morning trying to go somewhere she didn't want to go. You never asked where she was going. That is not relationship. That is opposition. And opposition exhausts everyone involved and produces nothing that would not have been produced more easily some other way." The young man returned to the work with the mare, not trying to move her where he wanted her to go, but first learning where she went naturally, and then finding the place where natural and needed overlapped. The work took longer than he had expected. It also produced something he had not expected: a horse who, once she understood that her direction mattered, became genuinely willing to adjust it. Lakota teaching holds the relationship between humans and animals, and between humans and the whole natural world, as a relationship of genuine kinship, not dominion. The concept of mitakuye oyasing, all my relations, all are related, is not a poetic sentiment but a practical orientation, the recognition that every being in the world has its own nature, its own direction, its own genuine quality, and that the person who does not acknowledge this quality cannot be in genuine relationship with it. The Lakota horse culture developed specific practices based on this understanding, practices that a contemporary observer might describe as patience or gentleness, but that in the Lakota context were understood as something more fundamental, the practice of listening to what the horse actually was before deciding what you wanted it to become. The horse has knowledge the rider does not have, of terrain, of danger, of its own limits. The rider who acknowledges this rides differently from the rider who does not. There is also in Lakota teaching the concept of wachin ksapa, wisdom, the quality of genuine discernment. And discernment in this tradition begins with accurate perception of what is actually here, not what you hoped or feared would be here, but what actually is. The young man failed with the horse not because he lacked skill, but because he lacked this discernment. He was responding to the horse he needed rather than the horse he had, and the horse he needed could only be reached through the horse he had. Think about where in your life you have been treating what is here as though it were the obstacle to where you want to go, when in fact it is the only available beginning. The conversation that is going in a direction you did not plan for, which you are steering back against the current, because the direction you planned seemed more productive. The project that has developed a quality you did not intend, which you are correcting back toward your original vision without asking whether the development is pointing at something your original vision did not know. The relationship with a person who keeps going left when you need to go right, and whom you have been pressuring rightward without ever asking what the left is about. In all of these, the energy of correction is consuming the energy of arrival. The pushing back is costing more than the moving with would cost, and the arrival, if it comes, will come exhausted and late and full of the residue of the fight. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of a conversation that turned when you released the plan for the conversation and genuinely followed where it was going, and how much further the genuine following took you than the planned direction would have. You may have felt this yourself in the particular quality of following a plan to its natural end, discovering at the end that the plan had delivered you somewhere, and then looking back and seeing that the interesting thing had happened, not on the intended path, but in the departure you had been trying to correct back from. The mare had been going somewhere worth going. Right now, in this breath, the body is going somewhere, not where you would necessarily send it. It is going toward rest, toward heaviness, toward the slow release of the day's accumulated tension. The direction it is going is exactly the direction you need. You do not need to steer it. It already knows the way. Just let it move. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not argue with the 10,000 things. He does not insist that the rain fall differently, that the seasons arrive on schedule, that other people be otherwise than they are. He sees what is. He works with what is. And in working with what is, he accomplishes what the arguer cannot accomplish. because his energy goes into movement rather than into the friction of insistence. This teaching becomes very specific and very practical when applied to the question of things we cannot control. The Stoic tradition arrived at exactly the same place from a different direction, the question of what is and is not in our power. And the answer, which Epictetus stated with great economy and great force, was that almost nothing external to us is in our power, and the single most consequential decision a person can make is whether they will direct their energy toward what is in their power or expend it in the endless, expensive project of trying to control what is not. The person who rages against the delayed ship has not influenced the weather. They have only spent the energy they will need for the rest of the journey. The person who accepts the delay, not with resignation, but with the genuine, quiet recognition that the delay is what is, has preserved that energy and can spend it on what actually admits of their influence. Resistance costs. The current of what is does not pause for the resistance. It continues, and the person who has spent their energy fighting it is now further from where they are going, not closer. There was once a young student who was furious at the delay. He had been traveling to study with a philosopher in another city, a journey he had planned for months, for which he had arranged everything carefully, and which had been disrupted at a port 2 days from his destination by weather that was in no hurry to improve. The ship would not sail. The captain was certain. The sea was not yet safe for the crossing. There was nothing to do but wait. The young student did not wait well. He paced the harbour. He returned repeatedly to the captain to ask if conditions had changed. He argued on one afternoon with a harbour master who had nothing to do with the weather, but who was present and therefore available for the argument. He wrote letters to his family complaining about the delay. He felt the delay acutely as a personal injustice, as though the sea had specifically chosen to inconvenience him, and the appropriate response was to make clear to the sea how inappropriate this was. On the 3rd day of the delay, he noticed that one of the other passengers, an older man who had been at the same port for the same number of days and who was waiting for the same ship, was not pacing. He was sitting on a low stone wall near the harbour, watching the water, and he appeared to be in a state of entirely unwarranted contentment. The young student went to him. "How are you not angry?" he asked. The older man looked at him. "What would the anger accomplish?" he asked. "It would express my dissatisfaction with the situation," the young student said. "And would the situation change in response to your dissatisfaction?" "No," the young student admitted. "Then you are spending something, the energy of your anger, your agitation, your arguing with what is, and receiving nothing in exchange for spending it." The older man looked at the sea. "The sea does not know you are angry. The sea is doing what the sea does. The wind will change when the wind changes. Your dissatisfaction does not influence the wind." "So I should simply accept this?" the young student said. He said it with the particular tone of someone who has encountered this kind of counsel before and finds it unsatisfying. "I would not use the word accept," the older man said. "Accept implies a kind of effortful coming to terms. What I would say is recognize. Recognize that the delay is what is. that the wind is what it is, that the sea is what it is. He looked at the young student and then asked, "What is in your power now in these conditions?" The young student was quiet. He thought about it honestly. "Reading," he said, "writing, conversation, walking the harbour." "Yes," the older man said, "several days of that, freely available, entirely unimpeded by the weather. The same days you have been spending on the arguing." He looked at the young student with something that was not unkind. "You have been treating the delay as the interruption of your life. But the delay is your life right now. These days are not the pause before the journey continues. They are part of the journey." The young student was quiet for a long time. "I've wasted 3 days," he said. "You have spent 3 days differently than you might have spent them," the older man said. "They are not recoverable, but today is still here, and the wind may hold for another 3 days. What will those days be?" The young student sat on the wall beside the older man. He looked at the sea for the first time, not as the thing blocking him, but as the thing that was there. The sea was, he noticed for the first time, very beautiful. The color of it changed constantly. The sound of it, which he had been too agitated to hear, was a quality of presence he could feel in his chest. When the wind changed and the ship finally sailed, the young student was rested in a way he would not have been rested if the journey had proceeded on schedule. He arrived at the philosopher's city with something he had not expected to arrive with: 3 days of observation, of writing, of conversation with the older man, and a specific, embodied understanding of what the philosopher he was about to study with had been teaching in all his letters. The older man, as it turned out, was a philosopher. He had not said so, and the 3 days of conversation with him, which the young student had had because the 3 days of arguing had finally exhausted themselves and he had sat, in surrender, on the wall beside a stranger, proved to be the most important 3 days of the journey. The philosopher he had been traveling to study with had written letters the young student had read many times, but what he had not been able to receive from the letters he received on that harbor wall. The specific, lived understanding of what the teaching actually felt like in the body. The difference between knowing a teaching and inhabiting it. He arrived at the philosopher's city and was surprised in the first days of study to find himself already several steps further than his fellow students. Not because he had studied harder, but because he had, involuntarily, been given the experience of the teaching in a way that no amount of deliberate study could have provided. The delay had taught him what the destination could not have taught him, because the delay had been the teacher in disguise. Stoic philosophy holds the distinction between what is and is not in our power, to ephemine and to ukephemine, as the fundamental framework for all practical wisdom. The Enchiridion of Epictetus opens with exactly this division. Some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, reputation, command, and, in one word, whatever are not our own actions. The Stoic practice of prohairesis, the cultivation of the faculty of choice, the deliberate directing of energy only toward what admits of one's influence, is not a practice of resignation. It is a practice of radical efficiency. The Stoic who has accurately perceived what is and is not in their power has not lost anything. They have freed themselves from the enormous expenditure of energy that the fighting against not in their power things requires. Marcus Aurelius returned to this practice constantly in his private journals, and notably he was doing so while governing an empire and fighting wars, which is to say, under conditions of maximal external pressure. His practice was not to be undisturbed by difficult circumstances, but to remain clear about what those circumstances actually required from him, as distinct from what his initial emotional response to them was demanding. There is also in Stoic teaching the concept of amor fati, love of fate, the active embrace of what is, which goes one step further than mere acceptance. Not to merely tolerate what cannot be changed, but to recognize that what is the only available material for the making of a life, and therefore to treat it with the quality of attention that one would give to something genuinely valued. The delay is material. What is made of it is the choice. Think about where in your life you have been arguing with what is. The situation that is not as you planned it, toward which you have been directing sustained mental energy in the form of wishing it were otherwise. The person who is not behaving as you need them to behave, whom you have been carrying internally as a problem to be solved. The circumstance, the health, the money, the timing, the opportunity that came or didn't come, that you have been refusing to acknowledge as simply what is, because the acknowledgement feels like accepting too much. In all of these, the arguing costs. Not the situation. The situation is indifferent to the argument. But you, the arguer, are paying with the energy that could be going toward what actually admits of your influence. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the mind late at night that rehearses what should have happened differently, not in order to learn from it, but in order to reject the version of events that actually occurred. The version rehearsal does not change. The rehearsing continues. The energy continues to be spent. You may have felt this yourself in the specific relief of a moment when you stopped arguing with something you had been arguing with for a long time. When you said, simply and clearly, internally, this is what is, and how different the quality of the next breath was. Not the breath of defeat, the breath of someone who has set down something very heavy. Right now, in this breath, there is nothing to argue with. The day is what it was. The circumstances are what they are. The body is what it is. Here, horizontal, heavy with the honest weight of a day lived. The wind cannot be changed by your dissatisfaction with the wind, but the quality of this night can be changed by the quality of your relationship with what is here. And what is here is rest. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu understood that the breath is the most immediate and most available teacher of Wu Wei. The breath does not force itself into the lungs, it arrives. It does not force itself out, it leaves. The rhythm of the breath, this most ordinary, most continuous of events, is a model of the way the Tao itself moves, not by force, but by the natural alternation of arriving and departing, of filling and releasing, of receiving and letting go. The Taoist understanding of the breath is deeply connected to the understanding of the body's own wisdom. The body knows how to breathe. It has been breathing since the first moment of life without your instruction. What disrupts the breath is not a lack of knowledge, it is interference. The tension that the mind's resistance to what is creates in the body tightens the breath, shortens it, makes it work harder for less. And the release of the resistance, when it comes, returns the breath to its natural depth and pace, which is not something you produce, but something that arrives when you stop producing something else. The Hindu tradition noticed this with great precision in the practice of pranayama, the study and cultivation of the life force through breath. And what the great practitioners of pranayama observed is exactly what Lao Tzu was pointing at. The breath that is followed produces more than the breath that is directed. The directive relationship with breath, the effortful controlling, managing, imposing a shape on what the breath does, produces a certain kind of result. The receptive relationship, the quality of following the breath, of discovering its natural depth and rhythm, of allowing the body's own intelligence to express itself without interference, produces something deeper. There was once a student who was trying to hold her breath. Not literally. She was practicing pranayama with a teacher who had been studying the breath for many decades. She had come to this practice from a life of considerable effort and considerable achievement, and she had brought to the practice the quality that had served her well in most areas of her life, the quality of determined, disciplined effort toward a precise goal. She was trying to extend the breath. Specifically, she was working on the retention, the kumbhaka, the pause between the inhale and the exhale. She had been working on this for several months. The retention was not improving. In fact, it seemed to be getting shorter. The harder she tried to hold the breath, the more urgently the body demanded release. The teacher sat with her one afternoon after practice. "Show me the breath," the teacher said. She breathed, demonstrating her technique, the deliberate expansion of the inhale, the effort of the hold, the controlled release of the exhale. "Now do nothing," the teacher said, "just breathe." She was not sure what this meant. She had been breathing deliberately for so long that she was not sure she remembered how to do nothing. She tried to do nothing, and felt the effort of the trying immediately. "You are doing something," the teacher said. "I'm trying not to," she said. "Yes," the teacher said. "The trying not to is also doing. I am asking for the absence of the trying, which is a different thing from trying not to try." He was quiet for a moment. "Let me ask you something. When you breathe in your sleep, in the deepest sleep, when there is no instruction being given to the breath, how deep do you think the breath is?" She thought. "Deep," she said, "slower than the waking breath." "And the retention?" the teacher asked. "In deep sleep?" She thought. "I don't know. I suppose there's a natural pause." "There is," the teacher said. A long one, longer than anything you have been able to produce in practice. He looked at her. The breath in deep sleep is entirely unmanaged. There is no practitioner present to direct it. There is only the body, breathing according to its own wisdom. He paused, and the body's wisdom produces a longer, deeper, more complete breath than your management does. What does that tell you? She was quiet for a long time. That the management is in the way, she said finally. Yes, the teacher said. What you are calling practice has been adding something to the breath that the breath does not need. The instruction, the effort, the directed control. And these additions are producing a shorter retention than the unmanaged breath naturally produces. He looked at her with something warm and very patient. The practice is not to add something to the breath. It is to become curious about what the breath does when nothing is added. To follow it rather than direct it. To discover what it knows about depth and rhythm and retention that you do not yet know. She left that conversation with a different quality of relationship to the practice. Not less discipline. The practice still required consistency and care, but a different orientation within the discipline, the orientation of following rather than directing, of discovering rather than imposing, of genuine curiosity about what the breath was already doing beneath the layer of management she had placed on top of it. Over the following months, the retention increased, not because she worked harder at it, because she worked differently. The body, allowed to breathe according to its own intelligence, found depths the managing mind had not been able to reach. Hindu philosophical tradition holds the concept of prana, the life force, the animating energy that underlies not just breath, but all movement, all vitality, all function of the living body. And the understanding of prana in the Hindu tradition is fundamentally non-mechanical. Prana is not a quantity to be managed, but an intelligence to be respected and worked with. The great texts on pranayama, including the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and the Yoga Sutras, describe the practice not as the imposition of a pattern on the breath, but as the gradual removal of the obstructions that prevent the breath from expressing its natural depth and wholeness. The chitta, the mind stuff, creates interference through its agitation. The pranayama practice reduces the agitation, and in the reduced agitation, the breath naturally becomes what it always was beneath the interference. There is also in Hindu teaching the concept of Ishvara pranidhana, surrender to the divine, the release of the personal will into something larger. And while this has metaphysical dimensions that go beyond the breath practice, its most immediate practical expression is exactly what the student was learning, the releasing of the personal management of what the body already knows how to do. The divine, in this context, includes the body's own intelligence, the intelligence that was breathing before the ego arrived, and that will, in the deep sleep the teacher mentioned, breathe without the ego's interference. Think about where in your life you have been managing something that already knows how to manage itself. The sleep that is being interfered with by the management of the sleep. The creativity that is being blocked by the management of the creative process. The body's healing process, the immune system, the repair mechanisms, the cycles of rest and restoration, that are being interrupted by the anxiety about whether they are happening fast enough. In all of these, the something that knows how to manage itself has been managing itself for your entire life, without your instruction, with considerably more precision than anything your instruction could provide. And the management layer you have placed on top of it is not helping. It is adding friction to a process that works by the removal of friction. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of the days when you were too sick or too tired to manage anything, when the only option was to let the body do what the body does, and how, in many of those days, the body did exactly that, restored itself, rested deeply, healed at a pace that the managed and effortful days had not produced. You may have felt this yourself in the particular quality of a night when exhaustion was so complete that the managing mind had simply run out of resources. And what happened in that night was the most complete rest you had experienced in some time. The management had stopped, not because you chose to stop it, but because there was nothing left to manage with. And the rest arrived in the space the management had vacated. Right now, in this breath, the body knows what it is doing. The breath is doing what the breath does. The heart is doing what the heart does. The 10,000 processes of the living body are proceeding without your instruction, as they always have. You do not need to manage them tonight. They are already managed by the intelligence that was here before you knew to call it anything. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu understood that the mind's attempt to fight its own contents is one of the most exhausting and least productive of all human activities. The thought that is resisted does not go away. It returns, carrying now the additional energy of having been refused. The emotion that is suppressed does not dissolve. It goes underground, where it does its work without the light that would allow it to be recognized and released. The Taoist understanding of the mind is non-adversarial. What arises in the mind arises. What passes, passes. The practice is not to control the arising and passing, but to find the quality of awareness that is neither swept away by what arises nor engaged in fighting it. The quality of the valley, which receives whatever the rain brings without grasping it and without refusing it, and which releases it naturally as the river finds its way out. This non-adversarial relationship with mental content is one of the central teachings of Buddhist practice as well, and the two traditions arrived at the same recognition from slightly different angles. The Buddhist understanding of dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness, identifies the fighting of one's own mental content as one of its primary sources, not the content itself, which is simply what arises, but the relationship to the content, the grasping at the pleasant and the pushing away of the unpleasant, which together constitute an enormous expenditure of energy that does not change the content, but exhausts the one who is spending it. There was once a monk who was wrestling with an unwanted thought. The thought had arrived some weeks earlier during meditation practice, and it had not left. It was not a dramatic thought. It was the specific, persistent worry about a decision the monk had made some years ago, a small decision in the scheme of things, but one that he now found himself unable to leave alone. In meditation, in the spaces of the day that were meant for quiet, and sometimes even in the middle of conversations with other monks, the thought arrived, and he found himself in immediate conflict with it. He had tried several approaches. He had tried replacing the thought with a more helpful one. He had tried examining the thought intellectually, following its reasoning to what he hoped would be its natural conclusion. He had tried noting it in the formal meditation sense, thinking, and returning to the breath. None of these approaches had dissolved the thought. If anything, the attention he was directing at the thought was feeding it. He brought this to an elder, a monk of very advanced practice and very little drama about anything, who listened to the description of the thought and the wrestling with the steady quality of someone who had been listening to descriptions of thoughts and wrestling for a very long time. "The thought keeps coming," the elder said. It was not quite a question. "Every time I sit," the monk said, "and in between sitting." "And what do you do when it arrives?" "I try to make it leave," the monk said. The elder was quiet for a moment. "Show me your hand," he said. The monk held out his hand. The elder pressed gently against the monk's palm with his own. "Push against me," the elder said. The monk pushed. The elder increased his pressure slightly, not overpoweringly, just matching the monk's push and adding a little. "Notice what's happening," the elder said. The monk noticed. He was pushing harder. The elder was pushing back. Neither of them was going anywhere. "Now stop pushing," the elder said. The monk stopped. The elder's hand, which had been pressing against the push, found nothing to press against and fell to his side. "Where did the resistance go?" the elder asked. "It went away when I stopped pushing," the monk said. "Yes," the elder said. He looked at the monk. "The thought is pressing against you. You are pressing back. Neither of you is going anywhere. The pressing produces more pressing." He paused. "What would happen if you stopped pressing against the thought?" "It would overwhelm me," the monk said. "Would it?" the elder said. "Or would it do what my hand did? Arrive, find nothing to press against, and lose the shape that the pressing had given it?" The monk was quiet. "The thought is not powerful on its own," the elder said. "The thought is powerful in proportion to the resistance it meets. The more you fight it, the more energy you give it. The fighting is the fuel." He looked at the monk gently. "This does not mean you must like the thought. It means you must stop feeding it with the energy of your refusal." The monk returned to the practice with this. The next time the thought arrived in meditation, he did not reach for his usual tools, did not try to replace it or examine it or note it and return to the breath. He simply let it arrive. He received it the way the valley receives the rain, without grasping, without refusing. He let the thought be fully what it was, in whatever shape it arrived. And the thought, for the first time in weeks, completed itself. It arrived with its particular weight and quality and said, in some sense, what it had been trying to say through all those weeks of being refused. And in being allowed to complete itself, it moved through and, eventually, on. It returned less often after that, not because the monk had resolved the underlying concern. He had not, but because the thought had found that it could arrive and be received and pass, and this was all it had ever needed to do. Buddhist teaching holds at its center the concept of non-resistance, not as passivity, but as the specific quality of relating to experience without adding the secondary layer of struggle against what is already here. The Dhammapada opens with the teaching that the mind is the forerunner of all actions, and that suffering follows when the mind acts from aversion or craving. The aversion to what is unpleasant and the craving for what is pleasant are two forms of the same fundamental resistance, the refusal of what actually is in favor of what is preferred. The Buddhist practice of vipassana, insight meditation, the clear seeing of what is specifically designed to develop the capacity to observe mental content without either grasping or pushing away. The meditator who can sit with the arising and passing of thoughts, sensations, and emotions without engaging the usual machinery of resistance discovers, experientially, that the content is not the problem. The resistance is the problem. And the discovery of this in the body and not merely in the intellect changes the quality of the relationship to all experience. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of equanimity, upekkha, which is sometimes translated as indifference, but is better understood as the quality of not being swept away. The meditator with genuine equanimity is not distant from their experience. They are fully present with it. But they are present in the way the valley is present with the water, neither swept away by the flood nor refusing the rain, simply receiving what arrives and releasing what is ready to go. Think about the thought you have been wrestling with for the longest time. Not the thought you had today and are still processing. That is natural and appropriate. The thought you have been in conflict with for weeks or months or longer, the one you have tried to replace, to argue with, to think your way through and out of, to simply not think about, and which keeps returning, as persistent as ever, possibly more insistent for having been so thoroughly fought. The wrestling is not working. Not because you are not skilled enough at the wrestling, because wrestling is the wrong relationship to thought. Thought does not yield to combat. It yields to the withdrawal of the combat. The hand that stops pressing finds the resistance dissolve. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of a worry that occupied you completely for a period, that was always present in the background of whatever else you were doing, and then, without your doing anything decisive about the underlying concern, simply became less present. You had, in some shift you cannot precisely identify, stopped fighting it, and the fightingless produced a quality of peace that the fighting had not. You may have felt this yourself in the late-night experience of a thought that would not leave, that you turned over and over trying to resolve, and then the specific quality of the moment when exhaustion took the fight out of you, and the thought, finding nothing to press against, simply quieted. Not because anything had changed about the thought's content, because the pressing had stopped. Right now, in this breath, the thoughts can arrive. They do not need to be fought tonight. Whatever the mind has been pressing against today, this breath can be the hand that stops pressing. The thought, finding no resistance, will complete itself. And in completing itself, it will move on. The mind, like the valley, can receive without grasping, and what is received without grasping passes naturally, in its own time, in its own way. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the highest good is like water. It benefits 10,000 things and does not compete. This teaching has many dimensions, but one of the most personal is the dimension of grief and loss. The recognition that the things we most refuse to feel are often the things that, when finally felt, move through us most cleanly. What is resisted stays. What is received moves. Grief is a current. It has its own nature, its own direction, its own intelligence about what needs to happen. The person who refuses grief, who damns it, who redirects it, who insists that they are done with it before it is done with them, has not escaped it. They have stored it. And stored grief has a different quality from moving grief. It does not diminish with time, but tends to accumulate, to seep into other areas of the life, to create the specific kind of heaviness that seems not quite connected to anything but colors everything. The Hasidic tradition has a very specific and very wise understanding of this phenomenon, the relationship between genuine feeling and genuine release. The nigun, the wordless melody, was understood in Hasidic practice as a vehicle precisely for the grief and longing and joy that words could not contain and that could not be resolved by the intellect. The nigun invited the feeling to move through the voice rather than being thought about or managed or resolved. And what moves through in the Hasidic understanding does not accumulate. There was once a young man who could not accept his grief. He had lost his grandfather, a man he had been close to, a man who had been the person in his life to whom he brought the things he could not bring elsewhere. The loss was real, and the grief was real. But the young man had decided, in the weeks following the loss, that he was done with the grief. He had allowed it its proper period of expression. He had mourned appropriately. The grief was supposed to be finished. It was not finished. It arrived in inconvenient places. In the middle of a meal with friends, in the quality of attention he brought to his work, in the early mornings before the day fully started. He met each of these arrivals with the same response, a firm refusal. This is not the time. This is not the place. I have already done this. The grief continued to arrive. A Rebbe in his community, a man known for the specific quality of attention he brought to those who were carrying something they did not want to examine, spent some time with the young man over the course of a winter. "You seem tired," the Rebbe said one afternoon. "I haven't been sleeping well," the young man said. "And your grandfather?" the Rebbe asked. The young man felt the familiar arrival. He felt his refusal of it, the same firm door closing. "I've mourned him," he said, "properly." The Rebbe looked at him with something that was not agreement. "You have mourned in the time you decided mourning should take," he said gently, "and the grief has apparently decided differently. So I should just give in to it?" the young man said. "Let it come whenever it wants?" "What does it want?" the Rebbe asked. The young man was quiet. He had never asked this. He had been managing the grief's arrivals for long enough that he had lost track of what he was actually carrying. "I think," the young man said slowly, "it wants me to remember certain things, specific things, about him." He paused. The way he said my name, a particular afternoon we spent together, things like that. "And when you close the door on the grief," the Rebbe said, "do those things get remembered?" "No," the young man said. "So the grief is offering you something," the Rebbe said, "and you have been refusing the delivery. The delivery person keeps coming back." He looked at the young man. "The grief is not here to overwhelm you. It is here because it has something to give you, the specific memory, the specific quality of connection, the specific thing that was yours with him, that needs to be received before it can be integrated." He paused. "Let it deliver what it carries, and then it will know it has been received, and it will move on." The young man returned home that evening with the door, for the first time, left unlocked. What arrived was not overwhelming. It was specific. The specific things the grief had been carrying, not unbearable sadness, but particular moments, particular qualities of the man who was gone, the particular way the young man had been known by him and had known him. These arrived and were received, and in being received were not taken away, but transformed into something he could carry without pain. Not the absence of the man, but the presence of what the man had been. The grief did not end that night, but its quality changed. It was no longer the heavy, undifferentiated thing it had been when he was refusing it. It was specific and warm, and finally, in the specific warmth, bearable. Hasidic teaching holds the concept of bitul, self-nullification, the quality of allowing the ego self to become transparent to what is larger than it, as one of the central practices of the spiritual life. And bitul is not, in the Hasidic understanding, a painful or destructive practice. It is a releasing practice. The release of the ego's grip on its own preferences, its own timetables, its own determination of what should happen and when, opens the person to the divine flow, which in this context includes the flow of genuine human feeling. The nigun, the wordless melody that is central to Hasidic practice, is a direct expression of this understanding. Words are the mind's tools. The nigun bypasses the mind's management and invites the deeper emotional and spiritual content to express directly through the voice. The great Rebbes composed and taught nigunim that could hold grief, longing, joy, devotion, the full range of what the neshma, the soul, carries, in a form that moved rather than stagnated. There is also in Hasidic teaching the concept of avoda, inner work, the genuine engagement with the soul's actual state rather than the state the ego would prefer it to be in. The tzaddik, the righteous one, is not the person who has no difficult feeling, but the person who brings their difficult feeling into genuine relationship with the divine, rather than managing it from a safe distance. The avoda requires showing up with what is actually there. Think about what you have been keeping the door closed against. Not the feeling you are in the middle of, that is already in the room. The feeling that keeps knocking, that you keep redirecting, that keeps arriving in the inconvenient moments because you have not given it a convenient one. The grief, the disappointment, the longing, the specific tender thing that you decided was finished before it was finished. It is not finished. It is waiting to deliver what it carries, and what it carries is not designed to overwhelm you. It is designed to be received. It has a specific content, something specific to give you about what has been lost or changed or not yet found, and the refusing of the delivery has not changed the content. It has only extended the waiting. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific quality of an afternoon when something triggered the stored thing and it arrived all at once with the accumulated force of having been refused, which felt much larger than it would have felt if it had been received in smaller amounts as it arrived. The door held and the pressure built, and when the door opened it was alarming. The alarm was not the grief, it was the pressure. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a conversation where you finally said the thing you had been not saying, named the loss or the longing or the feeling you had decided was unreasonable, and how the saying moved it. Not away exactly, through. The thing that had been stuck in the refusal found, in the saying, its natural passage. Right now, in this breath, the door can be unlocked, not thrown open. You do not need to process everything tonight, but unlocked. What is waiting to be received can know that it will be received in its time, without the fight. The current of feeling is not the enemy. It is the movement of what is alive in you, finding its way to the sea. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the master does not try. He acts without effort, teaches without instruction, and the things he achieves could not have been achieved by striving. This is perhaps the most paradoxical form of wu-wei, the teaching that the effort itself is sometimes the obstacle to the accomplishment of what the effort is directed at. This does not mean that skill is irrelevant, or that practice does not matter, or that the years of preparation a master brings to their work are wasted. It means something more specific, that at a certain point in the development of genuine mastery, the striving quality, the quality of trying, of checking, of applying deliberate effort, becomes the thing that prevents the expression of what the preparation has produced. The skill is there. The striving is in the way of it. The Zen tradition has observed this with particular precision in the development of physical and artistic skills, archery, calligraphy, martial arts, tea ceremony. The beginner who has just learned the technique is entirely in the striving mode, deliberate, effortful, monitoring each movement for accuracy. The master has internalized the technique so completely that the striving mode is no longer useful. The monitoring interferes with the expression, and the mark of genuine mastery is not the striving, but the quality of natural, effortless expression that arises when the striving has been absorbed and transcended. There was once a student whose effort was his obstacle. He had been studying with a master of calligraphy for several years. His dedication was genuine, and his progress had been real. He had arrived at a level of technical proficiency that was by any measure accomplished. He could execute the standard forms reliably. His brushwork was controlled and clean, Other students at an earlier stage admired his work, but the master was not satisfied. Not with the quality of the brushwork. The brushwork was fine, with what was behind it. One afternoon, the master sat beside the student as he worked and watched him begin a character. The brush moved. The character formed. It was technically correct. "Try it again," the master said. The student tried again, also correct. "What are you doing when you make the brush move?" the master asked. "I'm making the character," the student said. "How?" the student thought. "I'm thinking about the form, where the stroke should start, how it should move, how it should end." "Yes," the master said. "And where is the character while you are doing all that thinking?" The student was not sure what the master meant. "The character exists," the master said. "Before the brush moves, the character exists. In the tradition, in all the hands that have made this character before yours, in your hand that has made it many hundreds of times." He looked at the student. "When you sit here and think your way through the making of it, you are not discovering the character. You are constructing something that resembles it from your recollection of it." He paused. "But the character itself, the living thing, cannot be constructed. It can only be released." The student was quiet. "Released from what?" he asked. "From all the thinking about it," the master said simply. He put his own brush into his hand, not handing it to him, but demonstrating a single stroke, unhurried, that was the beginning of the same character. The stroke had a quality that the student's stroke had not had, and that the student could not precisely name. As though the master had not decided to make the stroke, but had simply made room for it. "How do you do that?" the student asked. "I stopped doing," the master said, "which took more years than the doing. The doing was the first learning. The stopping doing is the second." He looked at the student. "You have been very diligent with the first learning. Now it is time for the second." He stood. "Sit quietly before you begin, not thinking about the character, being with it. Let it be fully present, in your hand, in your memory, in the space before the brush moves, and then do not make the character. Simply begin, and let the character arrive through the beginning." The student sat with this for a long time before touching the brush. The sitting felt like wasting time. It felt like not doing the work. Then he began. And what arrived through the brush, not what he made, but what arrived, had the quality he had been admiring in the master's work and had never been able to produce by trying. Not perfection, something better than perfection, the quality of the thing being itself, expressed through a hand that had stopped insisting on its own version of it. Zen teaching holds the concept of mushin, no mind, the quality of action that arises without the interference of the deliberating, monitoring self-consciousness, as one of the primary goals of practice. And the paradox of mushin is that it cannot be attained by trying to attain it. The moment the practitioner tries to be in mushin, the trying itself reinstates the very mind activity that mushin requires the absence of. The great Japanese calligrapher Hakuin Ekaku described the ideal brushstroke as one that arrives from ku, emptiness, the quality of mind that is not full of the practitioner's intentions. The calligrapher who has achieved mushin does not decide to make a stroke. The stroke arises from the trained body in response to the moment, without the intermediary of the deciding mind. and the stroke that arises this way has a quality that no amount of deliberate technical execution can produce, because what the deliberate execution produces is always the practitioner's idea of the stroke, rather than the stroke itself. There is also in Zen the concept of satori, direct awakening, the sudden apprehension of what is, which is described as arriving not as the result of effort, but in spite of it. Or more precisely, after the exhaustion of effort, in the moment when the practitioner has tried everything and finally, in the exhaustion, stopped trying. The koan practice is designed, in part, to produce exactly this exhaustion of the trying mind, so that the insight can arrive in the gap. Think about the skill, the work, the relationship where the efforting has become the obstacle to the expression of what you have already prepared. The presentation you have rehearsed so thoroughly that the rehearsal is now in the way of the genuine response to the room. The creative work that has been so thoroughly planned that the plan is now blocking the aliveness that only arrives in the unplanned space. The conversation you have been so carefully preparing for that the preparing is preventing the genuine presence that the conversation actually needs. In all of these, the preparation was real and valuable. But the moment has arrived, in skill, in practice, in readiness, when the preparation wants to step back and let what it has produced speak for itself. And the efforting, which was what built the readiness, is now asking to be retired so the readiness can function. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of a performance or conversation that went unexpectedly well. And the specific quality of that unexpected well-going, which was usually characterized by the feeling of something happening through you rather than by you. The thinking stopped. The doing arose from somewhere you did not choose. And what arrived was better than anything that choosing would have produced. You may have felt this yourself in the quality of the creative work that happened when the plan ran out, when you were past the outline, past the preparation, genuinely improvising, and how alive it was compared to the portion that had been carefully prepared. The aliveness was not in spite of the preparation. The preparation made the aliveness possible, but the aliveness itself could only arrive when the preparation stepped aside. Right now, in this breath, the efforting can step aside. The body knows how to rest. The mind knows how to quiet. The preparation of the whole day, the entire effort of being alive and awake and present, has done its work. Now it can rest. And in the resting, what is deeper than the effort arrives and takes over, as it has every night of your life. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught that the person who follows the Tao does not impose a direction on the 10,000 things, but instead perceives the direction that already exists in them and works with it. This is not passivity. It requires more attentiveness, more genuine perceptiveness than the blunter approach of simply imposing your preferred direction and expending energy on whatever doesn't move that way. But the energy spent in genuine perception is far less than the energy spent in the friction of the imposition. Celtic wisdom traditions carry a specific form of this teaching in their understanding of the relationship between intention and the natural world, the recognition that the sea, the tides, the currents, the winds, all have their own intelligence and direction, and that the skilled navigator, fisherman, or sailor works with this intelligence rather than attempting to override it. The sea cannot be forced, it can be read, and the reading can inform the sailing in a way that produces safe and timely passage, where the forcing produces danger and delay. This reading of the natural current, the quality of attentiveness to what is actually moving and in what direction, is a skill that takes years to develop. But its foundation is simple: the recognition that the current exists, that it has direction and intelligence, and that the choice is between working with it and working against it. The choice to work against it is not forbidden. It is simply more expensive and often less effective. There was once a fisherman who always rowed against the tide. He had been fishing these waters for many years, and he knew the harbour well. He knew where the fish gathered at different seasons, the likely paths of the currents, the best places to set the nets at different states of the tide. He was a capable and experienced fisherman. But he had one habit that the older fishermen in the harbour had noticed and occasionally commented on. He always rowed out against whatever direction the tide was running. He rowed hard, and he was strong, and he arrived where he intended to arrive. But he arrived tired, and the rowing back was the same, hard against the current, which had by then turned, and he returned tired. In between, the fishing was productive, but the cost of getting there and back was, year by year, accumulating in his body in the way that unnecessary effort accumulates. An older fisherwoman in the harbour, who had been working these waters considerably longer than he had, and who was known for the specific quality of her apparent ease of always seeming to arrive and depart with less effort than the conditions seemed to require, sat with him one evening on the harbour wall. "I've watched you row," she said. "You are very strong." "Thank you," he said. "You are also always rowing against something," she said. He looked at her. "There is a back channel," she said. She described it, a secondary channel running parallel to the main harbour approach, shallower and less obvious, that the tidal current ran through in the opposite direction from the main channel when the tide was going out. Rowing out through the main channel when the tide was running in meant rowing against the main current, but taking the back channel at the same state of the tide meant having the current with you, a different channel, a slightly longer path, but a considerably easier passage. "I've never used it," the fisherman said. "No," the older fisherwoman said, "most people don't. It requires learning when the current runs which way in which channel, and most people figure out the main channel and think they have figured out the water." She looked at him. "The water is more complicated than the main channel. It has its own purposes and its own paths. Some of those paths are useful to us, some are not. But if you take the time to learn the paths, you can spend most of your life rowing with the water rather than against it." The fisherman thought about the years of rowing against the main current, the strong arms, the accumulation in the shoulders, the tiredness that was not quite accountable to the day's work. "And the fish," he asked, "the back channel, does it reach the same waters?" "It reaches the same harbour mouth," she said. From there, the open water is the same. The fish don't know which channel you came through. She looked at him with something warm. The water knows, and your body knows, but the fish don't care. He learned the back channel over the following season. The learning took time. The timing of the currents in the secondary channel was different from the main and required its own attentiveness. But once learned, the rowing was different, not easier in any mechanical sense. The same muscles were doing the same work, but moving with the water rather than against it. The same muscles produced considerably more forward motion for the same effort. And the arriving and departing were different. He arrived less tired. He returned less tired. He came back to the older fisherwoman at the end of that first season. "The fish are the same," he said, "but the rowing is different." "Yes," she said, "the fish were always the same. It was only the rowing that was harder than it needed to be." Celtic wisdom traditions hold the relationship between human activity and the natural world as a fundamentally cooperative one. Not the relationship of humanity imposing its will on nature, but the relationship of humanity learning to read the nature it is embedded in and working with what it finds there. The Celtic understanding of the landscape and seascape as living, intelligent systems, systems that can be read and worked with rather than simply overcome, produced a sophisticated knowledge of natural patterns that was encoded in story, in seasonal practice, in the specific lore of each river and coastline and mountain. The Irish concept of dúchas, natural heritage, the innate sense of one's place in a specific landscape, includes the understanding that the landscape has a direction, a set of tendencies and patterns that the person who knows their place well can perceive and work with. The fisherman who knows the tides, the farmer who knows the soil's tendencies, the shepherd who knows the patterns of wind on a specific hillside. These people are not fighting their environment. They are in genuine relationship with it. And the relationship produces a quality of working that is more effective and less exhausting than the working that treats the environment as inert material to be shaped by force. There is also in Celtic tradition the concept of the cowlight, the thin place, the location where the boundary between the visible and the invisible, the ordinary and the profound, is more permeable than elsewhere. And the thin place is not always the dramatic or the obvious location. It is often the back channel, the less noticed, less travelled path, where the quality of the encounter is different from the main route. Think about the back channel in your own life, the path you haven't taken because you were too busy rowing against the main current, the route to a goal or a quality of life that runs in the direction the current actually goes, which you have been ignoring because you learned the main channel and assumed that the main channel was the only channel. The relationship approach, the working method, the daily rhythm that flows with the grain of your actual nature rather than against it, and which you have been overlooking because it is less obvious than the approach you learned first. In all of these, the back channel is not less work. It requires learning, attentiveness, a willingness to take the longer path that turns out to be the shorter one. But it is less friction, less accumulation, less of the specific tired that comes from rowing against what is running the other way. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of changing an approach you had been using and discovering that the new approach was considerably less effortful for the same or better result, and the specific, slightly embarrassing recognition that the difficulty of the old approach had been mistaken for depth, for rigor, for the appropriate cost of the goal. The difficulty had been the friction of the wrong channel, not evidence of the goal's worthiness. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of suddenly going with something you had been resisting, agreeing rather than arguing, following rather than leading, resting rather than pushing through, and discovering that what arrived from the going with was more than what had ever arrived from the resisting. The back channel was there the whole time. Right now, in this breath, the back channel is the one the body is already taking. Not the effortful route towards sleep, but the natural current toward it, which has been running since the day began and which, if you stop rowing against it, will carry you exactly where you need to go. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught that the Tao does not insist, it does not argue, it does not force. And yet the 10,000 things arise from it, are sustained by it, and return to it. Its power is not the power of imposition, but the power of the ground from which everything grows, the power of the root, which does not argue with the rock it encounters, but goes around it, and arrives, in its unhurried going around, at the water that was not accessible to the insisting. This quality of non-insistence in community and relationship, the quality of the person who does not fight every battle, who allows things to develop as they develop, and who finds that this allowing gives them more genuine influence over the long arc of events than the fighting would have, is one of the most practically powerful expressions of Wu Wei. The Ubuntu tradition in African philosophy has observed this from its own angle and arrived at a very similar understanding. Nothing flows toward insistence. Everything flows toward the person who is genuinely present without the quality of demanding a particular response. The community, the relationship, the shared endeavor, all of these have their own direction, their own emerging shape, and the person who can perceive that direction and work with it is the person who ends up genuinely shaping it, while the person who fights the direction exhausts themselves and everyone around them and often ends up without the influence they were fighting to maintain. There was once a young person who was very certain about what the community needed. She had grown up in this community, and she had thought carefully about its direction, and she had, she believed, arrived at a clear understanding of the right path forward on a specific and important question. She had brought this understanding to the community council. She had made the case well, and the council had decided otherwise. She was not wrong about her case. It was a genuinely good case. The people of the council had heard it and had weighed it against other considerations and had decided, for reasons she found genuinely insufficient, to take a different direction. She was furious, and she made the fury visible. In the days following the council decision, she argued her case to anyone who would listen. She found the people who agreed with her, and she organized them. She brought her case back to the council in modified forms. She did not rest. An elder in the community, a woman who had been in this community for most of her adult life and who had, by anyone's account, shaped more of its direction than almost anyone else in its history, without, as far as anyone could tell, having argued for anything particularly strenuously, watched this with the specific quality of patience that belongs to people who have been watching similar things for a long time. She asked to walk with the young woman one morning. They walked for a while without speaking. Then the elder said, "Tell me about the decision." The young woman told her everything. The case she had made, the reasons the council had given, why she believed those reasons were insufficient. The elder listened. Then she said, "All of that sounds right." The young woman looked at her. "Then you think the council was wrong?" "I think the council made a different decision than you would have made," the elder said carefully. "Whether it was wrong is a different question. Decisions about communities are rarely simply right or wrong. They are made in a particular moment with the information available, and time tells the rest of the story." "So I should just accept it?" the young woman said. "I am going to ask you something," the elder said. "Not about the decision, but about what you have been doing since." She looked at the young woman. "What has happened in the community since the council decided?" The young woman thought. The community had continued. There were specific things happening that she had barely noticed because she had been focused on the arguing. "Life has continued," she said. "Yes," the elder said, "and in the direction of the decision. The decision is now the ground that the community is moving on, and the fighting of the decision it is like fighting the ground. The ground doesn't move, and you are expending energy that could go into what can be shaped within this ground on something that is now simply the ground." "But if the decision was wrong," the young woman said, "shouldn't I fight it?" "I did not say do nothing," the elder said. "I said notice what is now the ground and what grows within this ground that still serves what you care about." She paused. "A plant that fights the soil does not grow. A plant that takes the soil as given and finds the direction of the light grows. And in growing, it changes the soil. Not by fighting it, by living in it." The young woman was quiet for a long time as they walked. "You've lost arguments you cared about," she said finally to the elder. "Many," the elder said, "and you just went with it?" "I moved with what was now the ground," the elder said, "and found what could be shaped within it, and shaped it, over time." She looked at the young woman steadily. "The direction I cared about most is in the community today, not because I won every argument for it, because I found every path the ground offered and walked them." Ubuntu philosophy holds at its center the concept that the individual and the community are not in opposition, but in genuine mutual constitution. Umuntu ungumuntu agabantu. A person is a person through other persons. And the practical implication of this is that the person who works against the community's direction is working, in some sense, against their own constitution as a person, since the person is in part constituted by the community. This does not mean the community is always right, or that the individual should never resist a community decision. It means that the mode of influence most aligned with the Ubuntu understanding is not the mode of fighting against, but the mode of being genuinely present and genuinely in relationship, which over time shapes the community in ways that the fighting cannot. The person who is genuinely in relationship with the community, who is known and trusted and deeply engaged, has influence that the arguer does not have, because their influence comes from the quality of the connection rather than from the force of the argument. There is also in Ubuntu the concept of ukuhlonifa, respect, the quality of genuine regard for the other, which is understood as the ground of genuine relationship. Not the performance of respect, but the genuine orientation of considering the other's reality and perspective as real and worthy of genuine engagement. The young woman's case had been well argued, but had arrived, perhaps without full ukuhlonifa, for the reasons behind the council's contrary view. The elders' long influence had been built on the opposite, genuine curiosity about what others saw before genuine expression of what she herself saw. Think about the ground you have been fighting in your life, the decision, the situation, the reality that has been decided by forces larger than your preference, and that is now the ground you are walking on, whether you like it or not. The fighting does not change the ground remains, and the energy directed at fighting the ground is not available for the work of shaping what grows in it. And what grows in it, the next chapter of the situation, the relationship within the circumstances, the quality of the life that happens in this context rather than the preferred one. That is where your actual influence lives. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of circumstances you did not choose, the family you were born into, the health situation you are managing, the economic reality you are navigating, and the specific quality of the energy directed at refusing these circumstances, which is real and understandable and costs more than it gains, not because the circumstances were right or fair or deserved, but because the refusing is not changing them, only changing you. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of finally accepting something you had been refusing, a limitation, a loss, a change you could not reverse, and how different the day after the accepting was from the days of the refusing. Not better circumstances, better relationship to the circumstances. The ground remained, but you were no longer fighting the ground. Right now, in this breath, the ground is here. The night is here. The body's tiredness is here. All of this is simply what is, available to be moved with rather than against. The moving with is not defeat. It is the back channel, the route going around the rock. The community shaped from within, over time, by the person who stayed and listened and worked with what the ground offered. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the skilled sailor uses the wind. He does not fight it, and he does not merely endure it. He uses it, works with its direction, adjusts his sails to it, and arrives where he is going by means of the very thing that less skilled sailors experience only as obstacle. The wind is the same, the sail is different. And the difference in the sail, the specific quality of responsiveness, of genuine engagement with what is actually moving, is what distinguishes the passage that uses the crossing to arrive from the passage that merely survives it. This teaching about the skill of genuine working with, as distinct from the mere enduring of what cannot be changed, is central to the Polynesian wayfinding tradition, which represents one of the most sophisticated expressions of this understanding in the world. The great Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, using the wind, the swells, the stars, the behavior of birds and fish, the temperature and color of the water. All of this not as backdrop, but as information, as an active conversation between the voyager and the sea. The sea was not the obstacle. The sea was the medium, the carrier, the thing that made the arrival possible. The person who is in genuine conversation with the conditions of their life, not resisting them, not merely enduring them, but genuinely engaged with what they are actually offering, is in a different relationship to those conditions than the person who experiences them only as things to be overcome. There was once a young navigator who interrogated the ocean. He had been training in the art of open ocean wayfinding under an elder of considerable experience and reputation. He was skilled in many of the necessary arts. He could read the stars reliably. He knew the principal swells of the ocean they navigated. He understood the theoretical framework of his tradition's wayfinding knowledge. He was, in the assessment of the other apprentices, the most promising of the group. But the elder had been watching him with something that was not quite satisfaction. On a particular passage, a multi-day crossing to an island the young navigator had not visited before, the elder put him in charge of the navigation and watched. The young navigator navigated well. He checked the stars, he checked the swells, he made his calculations and his adjustments. He arrived at the island with an acceptable error of where he had aimed. That evening on the island, the elder sat with him. "You did well today," the elder said. "Thank you," the young navigator said. "You arrived where you intended." "Yes." "And what did you notice about the crossing?" the elder asked. The young navigator described it. The star positions, the swell directions, the adjustments he had made, the wind direction and speed at different points. "What did the ocean notice about you?" the elder asked. The young navigator looked at him. "The ocean," the elder said. He said it simply, without drama. "The ocean is attentive. It responds to what the voyager brings. The voyager who arrives demanding a particular crossing gets a different ocean than the voyager who arrives as a guest." He paused. "Today you are interrogating the ocean. You are asking it questions and requiring answers. Did it give you what you needed?" "Yes," the young navigator said. "The data was—" "The data," the elder said. He nodded. "Yes, the data was there, and the crossing was competent." He looked at the young navigator. "There is another kind of crossing, the crossing of the voyager who does not interrogate but converses, who offers themselves to the ocean rather than demanding the ocean offer itself to them. And this crossing provides something the interrogating crossing cannot provide." "What?" the young navigator asked. "The ocean's own knowledge of where you should go," the elder said. "Not just your intended destination, which was correct and well aimed for, but the ocean's sense of the passage. There was a different current today, running slightly south of your direct path. You corrected back from it. You treated it as deviation. It was deviation, the young navigator said. Or it was direction, the elder said. South of your direct path takes you past a fishing ground that we have not visited in some time. Your correction back to the direct path was technically correct. The deviation would have been informative. He looked at the young navigator steadily. The ocean was offering something. You were so focused on arriving where you intended to arrive that you did not notice the offer. The young navigator sat with this for a long time. "How do you tell the difference," he asked, "between deviation that needs correction and direction that needs following?" "That is the whole of wayfinding," the elder said. He smiled. "And it is learned not by interrogating but by listening. The interrogation tells you what you already need to know to arrive at your intended destination. The listening tells you what the ocean knows about where you are and what is here." He looked at the young navigator. "You know how to interrogate. Now learn to listen." On the crossing home, the young navigator tried it. He asked less. He listened more. He followed the current south for a time before correcting. The fishing ground the elder had mentioned was there. They arrived home with fish they had not planned to catch, following a route they had not planned to sail, having been shown something the direct path would have bypassed. He returned to the elder. "The south current took us to the fishing ground," he said. "Yes," the elder said. "I thought it might." "But you didn't tell me what to do with it," the young navigator said. "You only told me to listen." "If I had told you to follow the south current to the fishing ground," the elder said, "you would have done it once. But you would not have learned anything about how to listen. You would only have learned that the elder knew about a fishing ground to the south." He looked at the young navigator steadily. "What you learned on the crossing home was not a route. It was a way of being with the ocean. And that way of being will show you fishing grounds I don't know about, in passages I have never made, long after I am gone." He paused. "The route is a piece of information. The listening is a faculty. One of them ends when the route ends. The other does not." The young navigator went on to become one of the most accomplished wayfinders in his community's memory. He was known not for his knowledge of specific routes, though his knowledge was great, but for the specific quality of his attention to what the ocean offered. People who sailed with him said that the crossings were different with him, calmer, as though the ocean had decided to help. What he had learned to do was not to make the ocean calmer. It was to receive what the ocean was already offering. The difference between those two things was the whole of what the elder had taught him. Polynesian wayfinding tradition holds a profound understanding of the relationship between the navigator and the ocean. An understanding that goes far beyond the technical dimension of using natural signs for navigation. The great navigators of the tradition described their practice not as the mastery of the ocean, but as the cultivation of a genuine relationship with it. A quality of attentiveness and responsiveness that allows the navigator to be in conversation with the sea rather than merely crossing it. The Polynesian concept of mana, the power or authority that arises from genuine alignment with the forces of the natural and spiritual world, is expressed in the navigator's relationship with the ocean. The navigator of mana does not fight the ocean. They move with it in such deep alignment that the ocean's own currents and winds and swells become the means of navigation rather than its obstacles. The ocean knows where you are even when you do not. There is also in Polynesian tradition the concept of moana, the deep sea, understood not as an empty or indifferent space, but as a living presence with its own moods, its own directions, its own intelligence about what is here and where things are. The navigator who approaches the moana with genuine respect and genuine attentiveness is the navigator who receives its gifts. The navigator who approaches it as inert material to be crossed receives only the crossing. Think about the places in your life where you have been interrogating rather than listening. The relationship where you have been asking the questions you need answered rather than the questions that would reveal what the other person is actually carrying. The creative project where you have been checking your progress against your plan rather than noticing what the work itself is telling you it wants to become. The circumstance that has been offering a direction you keep correcting back from because it is not the direction you planned. The interrogation gets you the data you asked for. The listening gets you the data you didn't know to ask for, and the data you didn't know to ask for is often the more valuable data, because the questions you know to ask are bounded by what you already know, and the most important discoveries live outside that boundary. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the unexpected turn, the deviation from the plan that turned out to be the most important part of the journey. The meeting that went off agenda and produced something the agenda could not have produced. The project that went in an unintended direction and arrived somewhere the intended direction would never have reached. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of being genuinely surprised by something, not because the signs were not there, but because you were too focused on your intended destination to notice what the deviation was offering. The fishing ground was there. The crossing took you past it. You corrected away. Right now, in this breath, the ocean of the night is offering something. Not information to be interrogated, a quality. The specific quality of this moment, this temperature, this weight, this quality of dark, is the ocean telling you where you are. You are here, in the place where rest lives. The direct path and the ocean's path arrive at the same destination. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu pointed at fire as one of the teachers of Wu Wei. The way fire moves is not the way of forcing, but the way of following the conditions that allow it to spread. Fire does not push through what resists it. It goes where the conditions are right for going. Where there is fuel, it advances. Where there is no fuel, it stops. And the fire that fights its own nature, that tries to burn what will not burn, does not become more powerful. It simply exhausts itself against what it cannot consume. In the movement of fire across country, as the Aboriginal Australian tradition has observed for tens of thousands of years, there is profound practical wisdom. The person who runs from fire straight away is often overtaken. The person who moves not against the fire, but toward the conditions where fire cannot follow, toward the cleared ground, the water, the bare rock, is the person who survives. The survival is not in the fighting. It is in the reading of what the fire actually does and the movement into the space that the fire itself creates. This reading of conditions, the quality of perceiving what is actually moving and in what direction, and finding the position that works with those conditions rather than against them, is one of the deepest expressions of Wu Wei in practice. Not the passive enduring of what comes, but the active, intelligent, attentive engagement with what is actually happening. There was once a young person who tried to outrun the fire. She had grown up in a country where fire was seasonal, where the great grass fires came in the hot months, and where the knowledge of how to move in relation to them was a fundamental part of living well in that country. She knew the basics. She had been taught them from childhood, but she had never been in a fire as large as this one. The fire had come faster than expected, driven by a wind that had shifted direction twice in the morning and was now moving with a force that seemed to make the usual calculations unreliable. She had started moving away from it in what seemed the right direction. But the fire was moving faster than she was. She could see the smoke changing direction. She was not going to outrun it on the course she was taking. An elder who was moving through the same country came alongside her. He moved with the particular quality of someone who was not panicking, but was also not slow. The quality of someone who had all the information he needed and was using it. "Wrong way," he said, without breaking stride. "I'm moving away from it," she said. "You're moving in the direction it's moving," he said. "Come." He turned at an angle that felt, to her, like turning toward the fire. She followed him, afraid. He moved with a specific quality of attention, not to where the fire was, but to the ground beneath it and ahead of it. He was looking at the grass, the trees, the low ground, the exposed rock. "Where are you looking?" she asked. "Where the fire can't go," he said. He brought her to a stretch of low, exposed rock, a cleared area where a recent, earlier fire had already burned through. There was nothing there to burn. The fire came to the edge of it, found nothing to consume, and moved around them. They stood in the clear place and watched the fire move past on both sides. "You knew this was here," she said, when the immediate danger had passed. "I knew there would be somewhere like this," he said. "Fire leaves places behind it, places it has already been, or places it can't go. The trick is to find them." He looked at her. "When you run from fire, you run in the fire's direction. Because fire moves with the wind, and the natural instinct is to move with the wind also, but the wind is what feeds the fire. Moving with the wind moves you into the fire. So you move against the wind." "Not exactly," he said. "You move into the cleared space, which is often sideways to the wind." He paused. "The fire is not the enemy. The fire is simply what the fire is. It follows the fuel. It moves with the wind. It stops where there is nothing to burn. If you understand what the fire is, you can find the space the fire itself has made for you." She thought about this as they waited for the fire to pass and the country to cool. "The fire makes the cleared spaces," she said. "And then it cannot enter them," he said. The fire's own movement creates the safety from the fire. He looked at the country around them. Already the quality of the air was changing, the smoke thinning, the immediate danger becoming the stillness that follows fire. Everything that happens creates the conditions for what comes next. The fire creates cleared ground. The cleared ground is where the new growth comes from, when the rain comes. He looked at her. The thing you were running from was also making the place you needed to be. Aboriginal Australian knowledge traditions hold fire as one of the central relationships in the human relationship with country. The practice of fire stick farming, the deliberate use of fire to manage the land, to create the mosaic of burned and unburned country that supports the greatest diversity of life, is one of the oldest and most sophisticated land management practices in the world. It is based on a profound understanding of how fire moves, what conditions it requires, and what it creates in its passing. The Aboriginal Australian understanding of fire is neither the Western understanding of fire as pure destruction, nor a romanticized understanding of fire as purely regenerative. It is a sophisticated, practical, embodied knowledge of fire as a process with its own nature, its own direction, its own relationship to the country it moves through. And the person who knows this process can work with it in ways that the person who only experiences it as danger cannot. There is also in Aboriginal Australian tradition the concept of caring for country, the relationship of reciprocity between humans and the land in which humans take responsibility for the land's well-being, and the land responds with the abundance that sustains life. This caring includes knowing when to use fire and when to let the country rest. It includes reading the signs the country offers about what it needs. It includes the specific quality of attentiveness to what the country is doing, which is the same attentiveness that the elder was expressing when he looked not at where the fire was, but at where the fire could not go. Think about the cleared ground in your life, the place that was created by the very thing you were trying to escape from, the loss that produced a specific kind of openness that the unlost thing never could have, the failure that cleared the path towards something the success would have kept you from, the ending that turned out to be the beginning of the thing that mattered most, the fire that moved through and left in its passing, the ground from which the new growth came. In all of these, the thing you were running from was also making something, not despite what it was doing, but as a direct consequence of it. The fire's movement created the cleared place. The difficulty's presence created the specific quality of change that the ease could not have produced. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific pattern visible from a sufficient distance. The hard period that turned out to be the necessary condition for the good period that followed. Not because difficulty is good in itself, but because difficulty creates cleared ground, creates the space and the necessity and the specific quality of readiness that the ease does not produce. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of looking back at something you were running from and recognizing from the distance of time that the running had taken you into the cleared place, that the thing you were trying to escape was making the space you needed, that the fire and the safety were not opposites, but a sequence. Right now, in this breath, the day's fire has moved past. What remains is cleared ground, the honest tiredness, the spent quality of a day that had its fire and is now in the stillness after. The new growth will come when the rain comes. Tonight is the cleared place. Let it be quiet. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu understood that the most enduring works are the ones that arise with and through the nature of their material rather than against it. The wood carved with the grain holds differently from the wood carved against it. The silk woven with the thread's natural direction holds differently from the silk woven in defiance of it. Not because the carver or weaver with the grain is more skillful in any technical sense, but because their skill includes a specific and fundamental attentiveness to what the material itself is, what it will do if not forced, where its strength lives, what direction it prefers. The Mayan weaving traditions carry this understanding in a very specific and sophisticated form. The knowledge that the thread has a direction, that the cloth has a nature, and that the weaver's art is in discovering and working with these qualities rather than imposing a pattern that the material's own nature does not support. The most beautiful and durable textiles arise from this quality of deep listening to the material, and the textiles that are forced into patterns against the material's grain are often the ones that come apart under use. This teaching about the nature of creative work, that the work that flows from a genuine attunement to what the material is and wants to become, produces more than the work that imposes, applies far beyond weaving. It applies to the creative work of a life, the relationship whose nature you are working with rather than against, the vocation whose grain you have found and are following, the daily rhythm that is working with your nature rather than against it. There was once a weaver who kept forcing the pattern. She had been weaving for many years, and she had arrived at a considerable level of skill. The designs she worked from had been passed to her by her teacher, and her teacher's teacher before her, and they were beautiful and complex designs with a history longer than she could trace. She respected this history and wanted to honor it through the quality of her work. But she had been struggling with a particular design for several months. The pattern she was attempting, a complex arrangement of interlocking geometric forms, kept pulling in a way she could not fully correct. The tension in the cloth was uneven. The edges were not lying flat. No matter how carefully she set the threads, the cloth came off the loom with a specific quality of strain, as though something in it was resisting. She had tried many corrections. She had tried adjusting the tension. She had tried a different loom. She had tried the same design in different colors. The cloth came out wrong every time. An elder weaver in her community, a woman of great age and great patience, whose work had a quality that other weavers recognized immediately and could not fully account for, came to look at what she was doing one afternoon. She looked at the loom, she looked at the thread, she touched the cloth that was already woven. "Show me the thread before it goes in," she said. The young weaver showed her the thread, fine, tightly spun, a traditional fiber she had used many times. The elder rolled it between her fingers. She held it up and looked at the way the light caught it. This thread wants to go the other way, she said. What do you mean? The young weaver asked. The spin, the elder said. She showed her. The thread had a slight natural tendency from the direction of its spinning to rotate in a specific direction. You are working it against its spin. Every time the shuttle passes, the thread is being asked to do something that is slightly against its nature. Not wrong, not impossible, but against. She looked at the young weaver. The cloth knows. The cloth is telling you something is against. What do I do? The young weaver asked. Let me ask you something first, the elder said. You have been correcting the cloth. What have the corrections produced? More pulling, the young weaver admitted. Every correction makes it worse. Yes, the elder said. You are fighting the thread, and the thread is fighting back. The cloth is full of that fight. She set the thread down. Stop fighting. Turn the design. I can't turn the design, the young weaver said. The design is traditional. It has a specific orientation. The design has a spirit, the elder said. The spirit of the design is in the pattern, not in the direction. Turn the pattern 90 degrees. Let the thread go in the direction it wants to go. The spirit of the design will survive the turning. The cloth will not survive more fighting. The young weaver turned the design. The cloth she wove from the turned design came off the loom flat, even, with the specific quality of rightness that good cloth has, the quality of something made with rather than against its own nature. She went back to the elder with the cloth. The design is the same, she said. Yes, the elder said. She touched the cloth, and the cloth knows the difference. You can feel it. She looked at the young weaver. The fight was never between you and the cloth. The fight was between the design's imposed direction and the thread's natural direction. When those two things found each other, the fight dissolved. She paused. This is always the question with the thread. Not, can I force it into this shape, but what shape does it want to make, and how can the design live inside that shape? Mayan weaving traditions carry some of the oldest and most sophisticated textile knowledge in the world, encoded in the designs and techniques passed through generations of weavers. The Mayan huipil, the traditional garment woven on a backstrap loom, is understood not merely as clothing but as a text, a record of community, history, and cosmological understanding expressed through the specific geometry of the woven design. The Mayan understanding of weaving holds that the weaver is a collaborator with the divine. The textile is a co-creation between the weaver's intention and the material's own nature and the larger patterns that the tradition carries. The great weavers are those who have developed the specific quality of attunement to all three of these, the intention, the material, the tradition, and who work at the intersection of all three, rather than imposing any one of them on the others. The concept of Ixim, the sacred maze, the central substance of Mayan cosmology, applies in a specific way to weaving. The maze grows when the conditions are right, not when the farmer insists. The weaver works when the thread, the design, and the weaver's own state are in alignment. The forcing of weaving when the alignment is not present produces the same result as the young weaver was experiencing, cloth that holds the fight rather than the weaving. Think about where in your life you have been forcing a pattern that the material does not want to hold. The plan you are executing in a direction that the actual conditions of your life, your energy, your relationships, your genuine nature are not supporting. The version of yourself you are maintaining against the grain of what you are actually becoming. The relationship you are weaving in a design that the thread keeps pulling against, and which you keep correcting, and which keeps pulling. The correction is not working because the correction is fighting the grain. What needs to happen is not more careful correction. It is a genuine engagement with what the thread is actually doing, the direction it is going, the nature it is expressing, and the question of how the design can live within that direction rather than against it. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of a project or plan that feels harder than it should, that requires constant correction, constant pushing, constant maintenance of a direction that keeps slipping, and the dawning recognition that the difficulty is not the difficulty of the goal, but the difficulty of the wrong grain. The same goal, in alignment with the actual material of your life, would require considerably less fighting. You may have felt this yourself in the specific relief of aligning the plan with the actual grain, of turning the design 90 degrees and letting the thread go in the direction it wants to go, and how different the working was afterward. Not effortless, but with effort rather than against it, with the grain rather than against it. Right now, in this breath, the thread wants to go toward rest. It has wanted this all day. The design of the night is rest. The thread and the design are in the same direction. There is nothing to fight. The cloth will be right. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage is like the sea, which is lower than all the rivers, and to which all the rivers come. He does not fight the storm. He has a quality of relationship with the storm that is neither the fighting nor the enduring. It is something older and deeper than both. He goes with the force of what comes, and in going with it, he survives what the fighting could not survive. He preserves what matters precisely because he does not insist on preserving the form. The Norse seafaring tradition developed over centuries of sailing in among the most dangerous waters in the world, a very specific understanding of the relationship between the sailor and the storm. The ship that fights a North Sea storm is a ship that is fighting something considerably larger than itself, with predictable results. The ship that moves with the storm, that gives to the wave, that works with the rolling, that seeks the angle that the sea itself is offering, rather than insisting on the angle the sailor would prefer. That ship may not arrive where it intended, but it arrives, and the ship arrives intact. This principle, that surviving what cannot be overcome requires a quality of not insisting that the fighter cannot access, is the deepest and most demanding expression of Wu Wei. It requires the release of the ship's intended heading. It requires trust in a quality of arrival that is not the planned arrival. It requires the recognition that the storm is not wrong, and that going with it, even when going with it means going sideways or even briefly backward, is the path to the other side. There was once a young sailor who wanted to fight the storm. He had been sailing for several years, and he was skilled in the technical demands of the work. He knew the rigging. He knew how to read the sky. He had been in storms before, smaller storms, storms that his skill and his boat's strength had been adequate to. He had survived them by being stronger than they were. He had developed from this a specific and not entirely unreasonable confidence in the approach of fighting. But this storm was not like the smaller ones. The ship was 3 days out from the coast in the open sea, and the storm had arrived faster than the signs had suggested it would. The old sailor, who was the ship's master, stood at the stern and watched the sea with the quality of attention that only comes from many years of watching the sea. The attention that is reading not just the surface, but what is happening far below, in the patterns of the swell. The young sailor came to him. "We should hold course," the young sailor said. "Fight through it." The old sailor said nothing for a while. Then he said, "What is the storm doing?" The young sailor looked. "Moving from the northwest," he said. "Building." "And if we hold course," the old sailor said, "what is our relationship to the storm?" "We're heading into it," the young sailor said. "Yes," the old sailor said, "we are pointing our bow at it and pressing toward it, the ship's strength against the storm's strength." He looked at the young sailor. "Do you think the ship is stronger than this storm?" The young sailor looked at the storm. He looked at the ship. He was honest. "No," he said. "No," the old sailor agreed. "So the question is not whether to fight the storm, which we cannot win. The question is how to move with it so that we are still here when it has passed." He looked at the sea. "The storm is moving northwest to southeast. We want to go northeast. If we turn south, with the storm's direction and not against it, we lose our heading, but we gain the storm as a partner rather than an enemy. And the storm, as a partner, will carry us faster than we can sail under our own power." "We'll be driven off course," the young sailor said. "Yes," the old sailor said, "further south than we intended. And when the storm passes, we will need to correct north, more distance, more time." He paused. "But we will be here to correct. The ship that fights this storm will not be here to correct anything." The young sailor was quiet for a moment. "You've been in storms like this before," he said. "Many," the old sailor said. "And you always went with them?" "I learned to," the old sailor said. "I did not always know to. My first storm of this size, I did what you are proposing. I fought." He paused. "I was fortunate that the storm was slightly weaker than its appearance suggested, but I understood afterward that I had survived by luck rather than skill, and that luck was not a sound navigational strategy." He looked at the young sailor. "Skill is knowing when the storm is larger than the ship and choosing accordingly. The choosing is not weakness. It is the deepest form of seamanship there is." They turned south. The storm took them for 2 days and 2 nights, roaring around them, and they gave to it, eased the sails, let the wind take them, steered not against the waves, but at the angle the waves were offering. The ship moved, not toward their destination, but through the storm rather than against it. When the storm passed, they were further south than they had intended, but they were whole. They corrected north and east over the following 2 days and arrived at their destination 3 days late. The young sailor stood on the dock and looked back at the sea. "If we had fought it," he said, "we would not be standing here," the old sailor said simply. "The storm does not care how strong you are. It only knows its own direction. The ship that gives to it finds a way through. The ship that doesn't. Norse seafaring mythology and tradition hold the relationship between the sailor and the sea as one of the most fundamental relationships in the Norse worldview. The sea, Hafid, the great ocean, was understood as a force of enormous power and considerable intelligence, a force that the sailor could negotiate with but not defeat. The sagas are full of stories of sailors who worked with the sea and arrived, and sailors who insisted on fighting it and did not. The Norse concept of word, fate, the web of what is already woven, is relevant here. Not fatalism, which would suggest that resistance or skill are irrelevant, but the specific understanding that certain things are larger than individual will, and that the wise person perceives this and works within it rather than expending their limited energy in a fight they cannot win. The sailor who understands word is not the passive sailor. They are the sailor who directs their immense skill and courage toward what can be influenced, rather than wasting it on what cannot. The Viking navigational tradition also held the concept of landvatter, the land spirits, the particular genius of a specific place, as something to be respected and worked with, rather than overridden. The sailor arriving at an unfamiliar coast did not simply impose their intentions on the landfall, but attended to the specific quality of the place, to what it was offering and what it was not. The attentiveness was not superstition, it was the practical recognition that every place has its own nature, and that the person who perceives this nature can work with it in ways that the person who ignores it cannot. Think about the storm you have been fighting that is larger than the ship. Not every storm is larger than the ship. Some storms are exactly the right size for fighting, and the fighting is the correct response. But the specific storm you have been in for a long time that has not yielded to the fighting, that has been taking more from you than the fighting seems to be taking from it, that storm may be calling for a different kind of seamanship. Not the surrender of arrival, not the abandonment of the destination, but the willingness to go south when the storm is coming from the north, to give to the force for a time, to let it carry you, to trust that when it has passed, you will be able to correct toward where you are going, arriving late and whole and able to correct rather than not arriving. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific exhaustion of the long fight, the situation you have been meeting with force for long enough that the force is depleting something that is not being replenished. The fight is real, and the cause is real, and the insistence on fighting it is understandable. But the ship is being damaged by the fighting, and the storm does not care. You may have felt this yourself in the specific relief of giving to something you had been fighting, going south for a time, letting the thing that was larger than your resistance take you where it was taking you, and discovering on the other side that you were still here and still capable of correcting toward where you needed to go. The storm passed, the sea calmed, and the arrival that came after the going south was the arrival that was possible. which was the only arrival that was ever available. Right now, in this breath, the storm of the day has passed. The ship has come through. You are here, whole, on the other side of the crossing. The destination, rest, sleep, the deep quiet that the sea makes available after the storm, is north of where the storm took you. But you are in still water, and the correction is easy now. The body knows which way north is. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight, we began with one of the most counterintuitive and most liberating teachings that Tao Te Ching offers. That the source of so much of our tiredness is not the circumstances themselves, but the energy we spend refusing them. And over 13 chapters, we watched that teaching arrive in the most ordinary and extraordinary places. We followed a Sufi dervish who discovered that ecstasy could not be reached, but only received. That the reaching was exactly what the arriving needed him to stop doing. We accompanied a young chief who learned that the current the mare was already running in was the beginning of the direction he needed, not the obstacle to it. We sat with a young student on a harbour wall who discovered that the delayed ship had not interrupted his life, but had become it. That the 3 days given to him were full of everything the hurry had been moving past. We sat with a student who learned to follow the breath rather than direct it, who found that the body's own intelligence about breathing produced more than her management of it ever had. We watched a monk discover that the thought he had been wrestling with had been fed by the wrestling, and that the withdrawal of the fight allowed the thought to complete itself and move on. We sat with a young man who finally unlocked the door against which grief had been knocking, and received what the grief had been carrying, and found it not overwhelming, but warm. We followed a calligraphy student who stopped making the character and allowed the character to arrive. We listened to a Celtic fisherwoman describe the back channel, the path that ran with the water rather than against it, that took longer and arrived rested. We walked with an Ubuntu community leader who learned to move with the community's ground rather than fighting it, and shaped it from within over time in ways the fighting never would have. We sat with a Polynesian navigator who learned to listen to the ocean rather than interrogate it, and found the ocean offering gifts his questions had not known to ask for. We walked with a young person who learned to move toward the cleared place rather than away from the fire, and discovered that the fire had made the very space she needed. We watched a Mayan weaver turn the design 90 degrees so that the thread could go in the direction it wanted to go, and found the cloth come off the loom whole. And we sat in a Norse storm, going south when south was where the storm was going, trusting that the correction north would come when the storm had passed. And it had. And here we are. All of this is Wu Wei, the principle of effortless action, of not forcing, of the water finding the low place without requiring the low place to be elsewhere. It is not mastered once. The practice of going with is a daily practice, because the habit of going against is deeply embedded in most of us, and returns reliably with each new difficulty, each new delay, each new storm that wants to carry us south. The teaching does not ask you to stop caring about where you are going. It asks you to notice that the way you have been trying to get there has been costing more than arriving requires. That the river was going to the sea anyway. That the current, this current right now, carrying you toward rest, has been waiting all day for you to turn and float. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one image stayed with you, the dervish who stopped reaching, the sailor who gave to the storm, the back channel running with the water, let that be enough. The understanding that is genuinely yours will be there in the morning. You will have arrived somewhere by then. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are, with whatever you have been fighting and whatever you are ready now to stop fighting. The current knows where the sea is. You have been swimming in it all along. Tonight, you can stop swimming and float. Sleep well. And thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.